podcast. I'm your host, Lexi Halloran. I'm so excited to welcome our guest this week, Emma Maxwell. Emma has been a leading voice in the endo community by bringing attention to the impact of endo on everyday life. In this episode, we talk about our journeys with endo, birth control, and strategies to manage bad flare days. Let's jump in.
I'm Emma Maxwell. I'm also known as Endometriosis M on social media. I grew up in New Hampshire. I'm a New England girl, but I'm living in Portland, Oregon right now. I do a lot of work online to raise awareness for chronic conditions like endometriosis, adenomyosis, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, all things that I live with, and then beyond that as well. So that is mainly what I'm doing right now. I'm working with some great brands that I love and use, which I feel so fortunate to do that because that's what feels accessible to me right now. I would love to do things more in person, but just because things are so sporadic and I never really know how I'm going to be feeling, this is what I'm doing right now. And I love it so much and never thought that I would be able to make that or my passion of sharing stories and raising awareness and hopefully helping people feel like they have a community to fall back on. So yeah, I feel really grateful to do that. But that's kind of my day-to-day right now.
That's how I found you. Personally, I have endometriosis and I feel like I don't know. I feel like I didn't really have a community and it can feel very, very like isolating and lonely when you have endo. Like you just feel like no one understands what you're going through and it's this like invisible illness and people like think that you're healthy, but then I feel like shit. So I'm like, okay, it just feels really, really isolating. And then I think I found you on TikTok actually. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody else is going through what I'm going through. And of course, like I knew that other people had endo, but for some reason it just felt so isolating. And I feel like once I found you, TikTok, the algorithm just started giving me like more people that talk about chronic illnesses. And I'm like, oh, there are people that are struggling with this and like they still have a somewhat normal life and talk about just how to do like normal life activities. And one thing that I really do love about you is you like walk around with like heating pads on. And I love that because I have always like I work a full-time job still. I work in science and I have just like sticky heating pads that sometimes I'll wear and I'll like wear like big sweaters and have to like unbutton my jeans sometimes. And I honestly have found since finding you, I think I found you like maybe like 6 months ago or something. And since finding you, I'm like, I'm just going to talk about it. Like if I'm having a bad pain day and people are like, oh gosh, you seem like really low energy today. Like what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm actually in a lot of pain. Like I just tell people now. So I think you do really amazing work.
Thank you so much. That's huge. I'm so
Yeah,
proud
of
of you because
course.
I've also been in that and I still fall into that. It still feels super isolating and it's still a lot of times I feel like I don't talk about the things that like just like no, I'm fine, I'm fine. But that's no one will ever know until we talk about it. Like that is what I've come to realize is nobody's going to be able to understand or work with us if they don't know what's going on.
I know. I think it's so important to just shed a light on like what's going on. And I don't know if you feel similarly to this, but for a long time, it kind of felt like talking about endometriosis was kind of taboo because people have this like thought that endometriosis is just like a period disorder.
Mhm.
And as you and I know, it's not. But do you want to, before we get like too into that, do you want to explain like really quick what your conditions are and like kind of like what kind of symptoms you have?
I talk a lot about endometriosis because that was the first real answers that I had gotten for my pain. Since that diagnosis, I found that there are more things at work. But for endometriosis, growing up, the things that brought me to go to the doctor, and I was met with lots of doctors that just didn't like, well, pain's normal, you just can't handle it. You're over dramatic. Period pain's normal. I'm like, yeah, but it's okay. Super painful, heavy periods, very, very heavy bleeding, blood clots. At the beginning, it was very heavy, painful periods, uncomfortable, but I kind of just normalized it because that everybody says you're going to get period cramps and it's uncomfortable and it's part of being a girl and it's taboo, so don't talk about it because
Yeah,
gross.
I
Like,
know. Asking another question about that really quick. Do you remember, I guess you remember when you got your first period or when you were like, oh, like my periods are way heavier than other people's? Like, when did you realize that maybe that wasn't normal?
so I remember my first, those are two different instances. My first period, I got on the school bus to Washington, D.C.
Man.
for a class trip from New Hampshire to Washington, D.C. And it was super heavy bleeding. And
Hmm.
I, of course, didn't have anything at the time and was too embarrassed to ask people for things. So that whole trip, I was just using toilet paper.
Oh my gosh, I feel for little Emma.
Little Emma did not know what was going on. And I was in so much pain. I do remember that. But I was also like, okay, well, this is what it is. It's
Hmm.
normalized. That's so I didn't talk about it. I just kind of like remember going into the bathroom like on the school bus but at the time I thought that that's what was normal, eating through clothes. And it wasn't until I was probably about 15, when I started to realize that none of my friends were struggling the way that I was, because I think that just as I grew older, I felt more comfortable talking about things and had a very close relationship with my friends at the time. So we would talk about everything, and they just weren't experiencing as heavy. Like I was bleeding through pads, tampons, and my pants in a matter of hours, and scooting off the chair and waiting to be the last person to walk out of the classroom because I had to like clean it up
Yeah.
so that people like,
Yeah. And you're like, God, I hope there's not blood on this chair when I stand up. Like,
yep.
that would be
And
really,
there almost always was, and
yeah.
on my
And
pants. And I just like, no one around me had that. So I ended up going to a doctor, talking to my doctor about my heavy, painful periods at 15. And then they put me right on birth control and said that
okay.
that would fix it.
Yeah. Man. I feel like that's typically what happens, right? Like
Yeah.
they're just like, okay, birth control, this will fix your heavy periods. And I know I had like really I actually very similar experience to that. When you were put on birth control, like how you were like 15, 16?
I was 15. Yeah, I was 15 when I was first put on birth control. And then I cycled through
Okay.
10 different birth control pills from the age of 15 to 18, 19.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. And did it help at all? Like, what do you think?
No, no, it actually made things, it added a whole host of things that I just felt so out of control of my body.
Hmm.
But everybody was telling me that like everyone was on birth control. Like it was like not the cool thing, but like I thought that that's the way that it
Everyone's on
was.
birth control, and then like all the girls in high school have timers going off, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that's my birth
Yeah,
control
like
timer.
I
I have to
just
go
was
take it
saying.
really quick."
Mhm,
I'm like,
mhm.
"Okay." It was like
Yeah.
slightly different for me. I had a very similar experience to you, but when I went to go get birth control, because my mom was like, "Okay, like birth control will help you maybe figure out why you're in so because I was missing school a lot for pain, which I'm sure you were too. And when I went to go get birth control, they actually put me on the shot first. And then because they were like something about that having like a higher hormone load. I don't really remember. And that was around when I was like 14, 15. And I took the shot for a couple months and I was a nightmare. Like my hormones were insane. I was crying all the time, sleeping all the time. It was just like depressed Lexi. Like I was so happy and then I like couldn't I was in no control of my hormones at all. And then went to the doctors and figured out that I actually had a blood clotting disorder, so I couldn't be on like any hormonal birth control.
Mm.
So thankfully, I didn't have to cycle through like a bunch of hormonal birth control. Now I can just tell my doctors I can't be on that. So they
Mhm.
can't even like give me that.
No,
They still try.
of course.
They're like, well, you can sign waivers and then we can still put you on it. And I'm like, you want me to sign a waiver that I could potentially get a blood clot that could kill me? Okay, sure.
No, thank you.
Okay, so you were on these birth controls and then you were on them until like 18, 19. What happened next? Like, when did you actually get diagnosed with endo? Walk me through your journey with that.
I I was officially diagnosed at 20, September
Mm-hmm.
2019. And it took one OBGYN. I had been to so many doctors trying to figure out what was going on. I was going to so many
Mm-hmm.
specialists. I was going to ER appointments. I just like couldn't figure anything out and nobody had answers for me. I had
Yeah.
my gastro saying that because constipation is a very big symptom for me with endometriosis, which we found that
Mm-hmm.
endometriosis was on my bowel, my rectum, my colon. So like it all adds up now. Um, but at the time I had my gastro telling me that I have to live with the colostomy bag and I was 18 or 19 at the
Mm-hmm.
time and just remember being like, I don't think that that's it. Like there's nothing wrong. I just would rather you dig deeper before you're like, well, this is probably what you need. Like, so
Yeah. That's terrifying too. Like that's a whole like life-altering decision to do
right.
that.
And I'm so glad that I continued to, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm after my excision surgery. So I had that first surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm jumping around.
That's
I had the
okay.
first surgery, and that was with just an OBGYN from
Mm-hmm.
around town.
Yeah.
Um, just it was, yeah. Um, and didn't realize the importance at the time to see a specialist, to see, of course, excision, not ablation, all of these things that I talk about now, but which is why I talk about them because I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I had my OBGYN sit me down and say, has anybody brought up endometriosis? Like, this sounds like you have endometriosis. And I kind of was like, no, I don't. Like, I've brought it up to my doctors before. Like,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like Scott, like, and he was like, well, did they do a surgery? I'm like, no, they didn't. He's like, okay, well, we're gonna book you out for a surgery. And he booked me out 2 weeks out, which is crazy, like a crazy
Yeah.
turnaround time. Which then that's when I was diagnosed with endo. And then about less than a year later, I started looking for an excision specialist because that surgery, there was ablation done, and he only looked in my pelvic region where
Mm-hmm.
I was having a lot of chest pain and a lot of pain in all of
Mm-hmm.
these other places, like losing feeling in my legs, and told that there was no way that it could have been endo. But it took me 2 years on a waiting list with the specialist that I went to in January of 2023,
Wow.
my excision specialist, and that leaps and bounds different. Um, just yeah, I'm feeling a lot better now. Again, like I said, I have other things going on. I was diagnosed with adenomyosis through my second surgery, through the excision surgery with my excision specialist. So,
So, for people who might not know the difference between endo and adno,
mhm.
can you explain that really quick?
Yeah. So endometriosis is tissue similar to the lining of the uterus
Right.
that grows everywhere in the body. It can be found everywhere in the body. It's been found on every organ.
Mm-hmm.
And adenomyosis is uterine lining growing in the muscle of the uterus. So adenomyosis is specific to your uterus.
Mm-hmm.
Endometriosis is a full body chronic inflammatory condition.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Say
yeah.
that louder
Yeah.
for
It is a
everyone.
whole body
Full
illness. It is
body.
not just a period illness. And neither is
Yeah.
adenomyosis. Adenomyosis, again, is restricted to the uterus, but I'm sitting here with my pants unbuttoned right now, which
Yeah.
I had to like crop this up because I'm like, nobody needs to see that. But that affects me every day too. But adenomyosis, I'm starting to kind of understand what is adeno and what's endo after that surgery. So,
Okay. Do you feel like you have like different symptoms between the two of them? Like I don't know. I Can you tell like the difference on like which flare is which?
I'm starting to understand it more. No, I'm constantly confused with my body. I always say that it's a constant confusion, but I right now I feel like my super, super low bloating is
Hmm.
adenomyosis. And I always would say, like everybody always says endobelly, and like endobelly is most definitely a thing as well.
Yeah.
Um, But with adenomyosis, it's more of like a feels like a bowling ball, like a very heavy, inflamed,
Hmm.
fiery, like it feels like acid was burning it. Like it really depends on the day. I also think that adenomyosis contributes to the loss of feeling in my legs. But I also believe that endometriosis affects my legs as well because endo was found on my psoas muscle, and we believe that there was nerve damage with that potentially. But when my adeno is really bad, I definitely notice with my legs. And I also think my heavy bleeding is from adeno as well.
It's, I love it. It's lovely. People are definitely starting to talk about endo a lot more, but they also need to be talking about adeno at the same time because they're
Mhm.
both just like related but not related. Like they might create similar symptoms, but it's the same thing with like what's the other one? IBS. Like it create those get confused a lot clinically. Okay, and then I think you have one more chronic
Yes, well,
condition, right?
I have other conditions as well. These are the main three that I talk about, though. Yeah, I have a host of
Mm,
things, but I also have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome,
okay.
which is also HEDS. And that was my most recent diagnosis. I have always had a lot of pain in my body, like joint pain, dislocating
Mm,
shoulders, like super hyperextending, like arms and elbows and all of that kind of stuff. And when I played sports, I would have all of my joints wrapped. I would get my ankles wrapped, my wrists wrapped, my knees wrapped, everything like that. Um, and everybody always just like, ugh, like you're dramatic. Like you don't need to get all those things wrapped or whatever it may be. But EDS is something that's newer to me. It is a connective tissue disorder. So that is also a whole body illness. I actually just got a cardiology, an echocardiogram yesterday morning to check the elasticity of the valves in my heart just to make sure that everything's working because it can make everything extra stretchy. So it's not doing the things like prolapse is also a thing with EDS and all of those different things. So that's the third one that I talk about a lot too. Yeah.
Okay. How did you feel after? We'll talk about endo specifically really quick because I feel like that was the first one that you got diagnosed with, right?
Mhm.
So how did you feel after getting diagnosed?
I remember asking my surgeon immediately as I was waking up, like, did I have it? Do I have it? And he said yes. And he was like, yeah, you have a fair bit. And I just remember crying because I was so relieved to actually finally have answers going into that surgery and going into my second surgery. I was convinced because it's so easy to gaslight yourself because it is an invisible illness. I was
Yeah,
convinced that it was just going to be another test, like every other test that I've taken, that was going to say, there's nothing wrong with you. So, but the duality of that, understanding, I don't think that I understood the extent of endo at the time. My surgeon kind of made it seem like, okay, well, this is what you have. We perform the surgery. Now you're better, or you're going to be better, which of
it's
course
not
isn't the
true, right?
case, especially when it's not the right surgery.
Hmm.
I didn't know anyone at the time that had endo. People started to come out of the woodwork the more that I spoke about it, which was why I created my account, honestly, because I was like, okay, there are people out there. It's just a matter of people don't have a space where they feel comfortable to talk about these things or to relate to other people and understand that it is something that they can talk about. So it's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's kind of like a bittersweet thing, right? Like you feel, at least speaking from me, like I felt like, okay, I'm not crazy because I feel like everyone has told me for years that I am, and then I'm being dramatic and that it's normal. And it's a lot of like every single day fighting like the world, it feels like, to be like, I'm not crazy, I'm in pain. And then also, coming to terms with that it is a chronic illness and kind of like what that means in everyday life. So How has your perspective on living with a chronic illness kind of like evolved since your initial diagnosis?
That's a great question. When I was first diagnosed, I was not vocal whatsoever. I, not that I was ashamed, I just didn't know of anybody that spoke about things like this. So, yeah, there was a lot of shame and guilt surrounding it. And it also felt like I had to prove myself
Hmm.
constantly, because no one in my life really understood still. People have come such a long way. I've lost a lot of friends along the way. My family has become the most supportive system that I had, but at the time they just didn't know.
Yeah.
So a lot of like feeling like I needed to hide things and not talk about stuff because it made me overdramatic, and I still struggle with that sometimes, but sometimes I deal with that a lot still,
Hmm.
full transparency. But now it is my favorite. It's my passion. I feel like it's what I'm supposed to be doing. It feels like it's so helpful for me to talk things out. And I love that what's helpful for me is helpful for other people to hear as well. I don't know. It's evolved so much.
It's just like your life, right?
It's my life. And the more that I didn't talk about it, I was suppressing myself and my life. And I just was getting more and more confused because everybody thought, well, you're so healthy looking and you're smiling and you're masking. Like I was masking my pain so much still, and I still do, far less. Um, but yeah, I think just the more that you own it and the more that I've been stepping into it, it's just things are going the way that they're supposed to.
Yeah, I feel like it really is kind of an evolution. Looking back on how long, so I got diagnosed in 2018, I think. So I was like 19, 20,
Mhm.
19. I think 19. And there have even been times where I told myself that I didn't have a chronic illness anymore because I was like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burnt out, I don't want to do it. And I didn't feel like I really had like much support. So I was like, I'm just not going to have that anymore. And I was like
Ye-
burnt out by going to like doctor's appointments. Have you ever felt like burnt out like that, like with your chronic illness?
Yeah, yeah. Constantly, and it still happens. Yeah, there are points in time where I will just stop going to doctors. There are points in time, but just because I'm burnt out and I'm like, well, if I'm not getting answers, why am I spending money and why am I doing all this stuff for?
Yeah.
But then I get reminders that there are good doctors out there, and it all ebbs and flows, but burnout is most definitely a thing. It's a thing with doing what I do for like speaking about things. A lot of times the burnout is very real and it happens very frequently, to be completely honest with you.
Pivoting from that, let's talk about like mental health with chronic illness.
Good topic.
I know for me, especially during those burnout times, I went through times where I felt just so isolated and lonely and like no one really understood. And I also had specifically my gynecologist, or OBGYN. They're the same thing, aren't they? I don't know. I think technically they're different.
I think an OB is yeah,
I don't know. I think they can be different, but they can also be the same.
I use them interchangeably.
Okay, anyways, I'm like, I'll Google that and figure out what it actually is. Anyways, I remember after my first surgery to get diagnosed, which was a nightmare of a situation, but my OBGYN, we both worked at the same hospital and I lived in a very small town in Michigan. And yes, she was my doctor, but I also was like working there as a dialysis tech like while I was in college. And I feel like her and I just had, I was also pre-med, so like I had like told her that like, like I want to be a doctor. And she really told me a lot that, like I will never get through med school if I don't figure out a way to handle my pain better. And like very much pushed anti-anxiety meds, being on hormonal birth control, Orlissa. I ended up doing Orlissa, which is, for people that don't know, it like basically medically induces menopause, if I'm
I did Orlissa
correct.
as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was a nightmare for me. And I was pretty much pressured into doing that. I was not comfortable with it. And there was so much stress that was going on that I definitely did have anxiety, but I didn't want to be on anti-anxiety medication. I was like, I'm not ready to do that. Like I'll do like talk therapy, but I just wasn't ready to be on like antidepressant meds or anti-anxiety meds. And there came a point where she told my OBGYN told me that she would not care for my endo anymore if I didn't go on these medications. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. So I don't know. I just feel like there's so much just things that happen when you have chronic illnesses and you don't know what to do. So I feel like I started therapy and I didn't do the anti-anxiety meds because I just like wasn't comfortable with it yet. And I didn't feel like I had true anxiety in that way. I felt like I just had like situational, like I was stressed and burnt out from my illness.
You don't
I just
say.
needed to talk about it.
Yeah.
So have you tried like therapy or anything like that?
Oh my gosh, yes. I wish I started therapy sooner. I wish that I was going to therapy in high school. I lucked out with the best therapists, truly. Like, she has helped me so much throughout the years. I've been seeing her since late 2020 or since 2020.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Um, and I'm actually seeing two therapists. So I just love it. Therapy is immensely helpful. It's so helpful to talk it through with someone. It's so helpful to, because I bottled everything up and I felt like I didn't have people that I could talk to in my life. And when I felt like I did open up, it felt like I was complaining or being a burden. So
Yeah, you definitely are not a burden for speaking to the people in your life about things that are going on in your life. And it does take a long time to just come to that realization. And also, for anyone who's listening that might feel like that, the people that are feeling like you're burdening them don't need to be in your life anyway.
they're not your people.
They're not your
Bye.
people.
They're weeding themselves out. It hurts. It doesn't make it hurt any less, but I'm grateful for the people that they showed what they can give. And if they can't give you what you need at your worst, then they don't get you at your best.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So how do you prioritize just like your health? I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like an ebb and flow kind of situation. Like, for example, you have a day where you might have plans or you have something going on and you have a flare up. Like, how do you handle that?
That's today because I have to go out after this and I'm feeling okay, but I'm doing the things to, well, if it's too bad, like if it gets really bad, I'm a lot better about giving myself grace to cancel things without guilt. I'm surrounding myself with people that understand. And if, again,
Yeah.
like you just said, the people that think that it's a burden or they make your struggles about them, then those aren't your people. So, but on the days that I do still need to get out, I have my portable heating pads, which is huge,
Yeah.
huge. Myobi, which I love them so much. And I'm actually looking at two of them in my purse right now.
I've seen you post about them and I've been meaning to try them. So they have like multiple, like different kinds. Yeah, pull them out.
We'll just do a sorry for the people that can't see right now, but this is the Myobi Artemis, which is heat and vibration,
Ooh,
which
okay.
is really nice. This is the second version, and then this is the Apollo 2.0, which is the second version, which has
Mm.
heat tens and red light therapy, which is incredibly helpful. Both of them I use interchangeably because I feel like the other one gives more heat, and sometimes I just need heat and comfortable. Like I can't have like this is metal on the Apollo because of the tens, which is
Oh
helpful.
yeah.
I use them interchangeably and they're huge. Tens is huge for me too when I'm having muscle spasms because I have pelvic floor spasms from hypertonic pelvic floor dysfunction. And then that kind of starts in the pelvic floor and then goes down my legs, up my back. And that This is right here right now because I used it right before I hopped on.
Yes, I do have that. I love some days.
Some days is
They're so
my
good.
absolute favorite. They're the best. I actually just got an email from them right before this that they bumped up my code for the community to 15%. So I was like, yes, we love to save money.
I love that. I love that. What's your code?
It's endometriosis M.
Okay, there you go, everybody. 15% off.
And for Myobi, it's just Emma. Yeah, I have a lot of things that like different products, but on the super hard days, I try to let myself take it easy. Journaling is super helpful sometimes because I can get so wrapped up in my brain and overthink, and there can be a million thoughts at the same time. And actually writing things down and how I'm feeling and checking in and reminding myself that
Yeah,
stress isn't going to make it any better. So
true.
stress is a thing.
I know. I feel like that is something I struggle with hardcore is just, I feel like I'm kind of like a stressed out person in general. Obviously, if you have endometriosis, you have increased inflammation in general. And then for people who may not know, if you have more stress hormones, cortisol, it increases the amount of inflammation in your body more. So then we're just like already inflamed, stressed out, more inflamed, and then I'm more stressed because I'm inflamed. And
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, this is really lovely.
getting caught in the cycle.
Yeah, it's just a never-ending cycle. I mean, I know we just talked about the Myobi and then some days, but are there anything else or is there anything else that you found kind of helps on those days or lifestyle changes that you've tried or
Yeah.
maybe seen that don't work or do work?
hmm I'm on an anti-inflammatory diet. I also want to start off by saying what works for me might not work for you. And you're not doing anything wrong if you've tried these things and they're not working for you because everybody is different and
Yes, heavy on that everybody is different.
everybody. Yeah.
Yes, everybody, everybody is different. Also, every case of endometriosis is different, like what organs it's on, what stage it is. So it can be very different. The most common factor, though, is that it is just inflammatory in general. So,
I've definitely tried a lot of things that don't work, things that I've heard from other people that work for other people. But for me right now, I've been gluten and dairy free for over 2 years, probably around 3 years now. And that has helped immensely, immensely with just feeling because I was so inflamed. I didn't realize how inflamed I was. I've always been very, very inflamed. So going gluten dairy free was huge for me. It took like a while for me to actually start to feel and see the difference, but
yeah.
now when I do have those things, I'm like, oh, that's not good. So, and I don't. And I like, but if I accidentally get glutened or something like that, I feel it in my bones. So,
Yeah. Did you, and totally okay if you didn't, but just curious, did you do any like food sensitivity or like allergy testing or anything? Or were you just like, because I know a lot of times like doctors will suggest just going like dairy or gluten free. Like they've suggested that to me as well. But just curious if you did any testing.
honestly, we did the celiac test, and I'm not celiac. So, I'm but it still heavily affects me. And honestly, I got to the point of it doesn't really matter what the tests say because it is something that's helping.
Hmm.
I No, we never really did an allergy test or anything like a
Yeah.
food channel of that.
I was just curious if that maybe like swayed your decision to go dairy or gluten free. But I know for me, if like my doctors have suggested that for a very long time, but I'm from the Midwest and I love cheese. So I just like don't know how to
Yeah.
do it.
No.
Like cheese curds are my weakness. So I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, that has gluten and dairy. Like, how am I supposed to not eat that?
Also, starting to track my cycle and understand lifestyle wise that I feel different in my menstrual phase than I do in my follicular and ovulation and luteal. And
Hmm.
in my luteal phase, it feels like the world is crumbling around me and my mental health plummets a lot. And I feel more increased pain and more increased anxiety. And when I wasn't tracking that, I just felt like I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm like, okay, I look at the calendar and I go, okay, this is just the way that it is. And it's been helpful to kind of understand that and just see it from a different perspective as opposed to being so in it, being like, okay, now I know that I'm not going to do anything. I don't plan anything around my menstrual cycle. I keep that week clear.
I know for some people with endo, they might have more pain during like ovulation versus menstrual. Do you feel like most of your pain is like during your actual menstrual cycle?
Yeah. Yeah. It's during when I'm actually bleeding, that is the most pain. Like that's the debilitating pain. Can't breathe, can't move from bed, can't walk to the kitchen. My sister takes care of me. My sister lives with me in Portland, which I'm so, so, so grateful for the support from everybody in my life. I genuinely don't know what I would do without everybody. But yeah, during my menstrual cycle, it's
Hmm.
definitely worse. Then I get 1 week after my period, which I'm going into right now, which is the follicular phase, which that's when I book all of my appointments. And that's when I go out and go see people because I'm feeling more social and
Yeah.
I'm feeling better. So I want to go do things while I can. And then ovulation, pain spikes, but not nearly as much as my period. I just get a lot of bloating and just like uncomfortable. And then I go into my luteal phase, which is when it starts to wind down.
So for your cycle tracking, do you like use anything or do you just kind of journal it out? Like, how did you start cycle tracking?
That's a good question. I tried a lot of things. I tried a bullet journal. I tried to do it on Google Drive. I tried to do it all these different ways. Now I use Stardust, which is an app, and I use the free version, and it's still incredible. It tells me when my cycle's coming, it tells me when ovulation is, and then you can track symptoms and different things, and then it kind of gives you trends of how you're feeling, which is incredibly great to have the insight of, oh, I felt this way on this day last month, or my bloating was really bad, or I'm super hungry, or whatever it may be, like hot flashes. I get those the 3 days before my period, and they're crazy. But now I'm like, okay, at least now I can prepare for them. But Stardust is a great app. Also, I was using Bearable as well,
Okay.
for a while, but that was more for symptom tracking.
Yeah. Have you had a hard time? I guess I'll phrase it this way. For me, I have had a really, really hard time cycle tracking because I have an IUD and I don't actually bleed anymore. I don't really know when my period is. Do you actually have like a bleeding cycle?
I am not on any, I have no hormones. I've tried. I had the
Ooh.
IUD.
Mm-hmm.
I did the medically induced menopause. I did a bunch of birth control pills. I did separate hormone pills. Nothing seemed to work with my body and just added things. So yeah, right now I'm just,
Okay. I don't know. I actually am on my third IUD and I'm like not loving it. Last year when I went to go get my third one, so the second one removed, my third one in. You and I can talk about that in a separate time or I'll do an episode about like that horror story that was. But summarized version, I ended up having to get my cervix dilated because they couldn't get the old IUD out. Like the string was coiled like inside, like above my cervix. So they couldn't get it out and they had to, I literally don't even know how they dilated me. They were just like, okay, this is gonna hurt. And I was like, okay, I don't know what you're doing. And they're like, we have to dilate you so that we can get it out. And I'm like, cool.
not explain what that is.
I know I'm like, all right, so I have no option. And they were like, not really, unless you want to do surgery. And I was like, okay, I guess just try to get it out. So they ended up dilating my cervix, which I don't even really fully understand how they did that, but cool. And then they took it out. That was painful. They put the next one in, and then I had like actual contractions. My body was like, please get this out of me, like was definitely rejecting it. And they did an interuterine ultrasound, which I'm sure you've had before. Like anyone with a pelvic disorder has definitely had those before. So they had, a probe there, and I was watching the contractions on the ultrasound, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like,
That's
this hurts
crazy.
so bad. So that's the IUD that I have right now. That was a year ago. It's very weird because I haven't had a bleeding period since I was like 16 because I've been on I've had IUDs the whole time. I have no idea how to cycle track because I don't know when I'm supposed to have my period. And I've done like some tracking. I'm like, oh, my boobs are sore, or I have endobelly, or I have really bad cramps, and I'll like track that. But with endometriosis, like your cycles can be so weird that it's so hard for me to even like plan that or track it. So I was curious if you have any advice for people with like endo that, have like irregular cycles. Like, how do you even track that? Because I feel like so many people talk about cycle tracking, but it's always people who have like normal periods.
Yes. My cycles have always been irregular up until very recently. So it's really hard when you're on birth control too, and because it adds a whole level of things and your body, at least with specific hormones, I don't know about the IUD, how that necessarily works, but your body stops producing the hormones so you can't track it because you're not really having a period because you're kind of in this.
Yeah, it's in this weird like limbo. I have the Mirena, and that confuses me a little bit because it's local hormones. So
Yeah.
it's supposed to just stay in your uterus. In the show notes, I will Google and put some actually like scientifically backed research in there so I'll explain how that works a little bit because it still does confuse me to this day on like how I just haven't bled in like 10 years.
Yeah.
I think I need to get this thing out.
It's a hard decision, especially when you've been on something for so long and you know that like where you're at
Mhm.
now and you're like, well, what if it gets worse? But what if it gets better? What if it like,
That's the big thing is that when I was going to get this last one taken out and then put in last year, I was telling my doctor, I was like, I don't think I want to get another one. Like, I think I just want to see what my body does. And she was just like, I do not suggest that. She was like, whatever your period was, it's going to be 10 times worse. And I'm like, why?
say that?
So I don't know if I necessarily believe that, but it scared me. I was like, okay, fine. I'll just get it.
Your tactic into taking medications when people are advocating for themselves or they're hesitant about things and not encouraging that patient to go home and go do their research and figure out what
Hmm.
they feel is best for themselves is just not.
It's
But I
not it.
understand. Like I hear you. I had the Mirena too. I had it taken out 6 months after I had it placed because it was just causing me so many issues. I was having the contractions. I was having like just pelvic floor spasms that just were uncontrollable. And they were just like, well, you just need to wait it out. Like you just need to tough it out. It's gonna get better. It's gonna get better. And I was like, no, but it's not getting better. And I'm bleeding for months at a time. And I was
Yeah.
taking this to not bleed. Every time I've been on birth control, people are like, well, why don't you just skip your period? I'm like, oh, I've tried.
I'm like, how? How do I do that?
It comes back full force and longer. So I don't really know. It does not like when I try to suppress it. So I think cycle tracking can be hard. I know that I really want an Aura ring, which tracks like temperature and heart rate and like all of things like that. And I've heard from people in the community that it's super helpful for them to gauge their pain,
Yeah.
because it kind of tells you, like, it just gives you insight on the things that you can't necessarily see or feel or whatever it may be. So I think that that can be helpful. I know that basal body temperature can also help with tracking things as well. Just, yeah, it's really hard when it's irregular because when I was irregular, I had zero idea. I don't know what's happened in the last few years. And it's still irregular. I'm not like a 28-day girl or but I can kind of gauge where it's going to fall, like in a week.
I have heard that the excision surgery actually helps a lot with kind of regulating some things because it's actually taking it out, whereas ablation is burning it. So it's not. And I know that you kind of talked a little bit about how you had both, and it seems like you feel happier with the excision. Personally, I've only had the ablation because where I was living was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Like there were not specialists. So now that I'm in the Seattle area, I'm like, I need a specialist. I want this excision surgery.
Hmm.
Tell me like how you felt after the ablation versus the excision. Like what was the recovery time for you?
Immensely different. After my first surgery, my doctor only gave me, I was in college at the time.
Hmm.
I was working at a high school as a coach at the time. I got 2 weeks off. He gave me a 2-week recovery time. I got 1 week off from school. And I think I ended up pushing that a little bit because it was like, I'm not ready to go back to school. And then when I did go back to school, it just was a lot. I was using a cane. I'm so grateful for mobility aids. And I was so that internalized ableism. I was like, I don't need a cane. Like, that's not. And my dad was like, just use it. Like, we're going to CVS and picking it up. You're a coach. You need to be walking up and down the field. Like,
Hmm.
just take the help. And it hasn't left my side since. It's actually the first one that I had is right behind me over
I
there.
love
But
that.
I started to actually like feel more healed in a few weeks. Like it was probably like a month I was starting to like able to do things again after the ablation. However, there were just far more issues that came up with that. I had adhesions and it felt like things were pulling more and
Hmm. From my understanding, the ablation can actually cause a lot more scar tissue. So then when you are recovering from that, you can actually start having like a lot of like scar tissue cramping. I definitely did. It was rough, 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 rough. Okay. And then what about the excision surgery? Like, how did you feel about that?
the excision surgery was a long, hard recovery. I had deep infiltrating endo widespread throughout my body from my ribs to, like I said, my psoas muscle, like around my hips.
Yeah.
And everything was kind of pulling, and they had to remove a lot. Recovery was intense. It was very intense. I got discharged the same day, which is just so crazy to me.
I know it is.
I was fine to go home. It was like an hour and a half drive, and then I had to climb upstairs
Ugh.
to get to my room, which was intense. And then after that, I did not leave the upstairs floor for 2 weeks. I wasn't able to shower it was 5 days after, and my parents ended up getting me a chair and I wore a bathing suit and my mom washed my hair and like did everything for me because I couldn't. I needed them to wake up in the depths of the night to feed me my medications, to make me food, to come in and use a massager on my body because I was just in so much pain. And it was a lot. It was a lot. It took me about 8 months. It was around the 8 month mark, which I don't want to scare anyone off. I think that everybody's healing journey is so different as well, but it just took me 8 months to really start to feel like I was able to walk upstairs again and do things. And
I mean, I only have the ablation to compare to, but even after the ablation, it was so confusing to me, like why I was even in pain because I was like, they barely even cut me. Like, why am I in so much pain? But then like you do more research on it and you're like, oh, that makes sense why I'm in pain. It hurt to like get up by myself. Like the bending motion was like terrible. Did you have like that type of stuff after the excision?
1,000%. My parents ended up the chair that I was using in the shower, they got for the toilet because I couldn't get up and down. So I needed handles to get up and down.
Yeah.
My parents, for like 2 weeks, had to lift. I would sit on my bed and then I would have them lift one leg and then they would lift up the other leg and then they would scoot me on. Like
Oh,
I couldn't bend over. I couldn't put socks on. I had a lot of incision pain. I had a lot of deep pain, a lot of full body twitches right after my surgery, just because I think that my body was in so much shock that like everything was jumping. And then the gas pains from
oh my
surgery,
gosh, yeah, those are terrible.
huge. Like,
Was like
what?
in your shoulder blades and it hurts so bad. And oh my gosh. I feel like for that type of pain, like sleeping in a recliner is actually probably the most comfortable situation because you like can't lay fully flat on your back.
Yeah,
So, I mean, do you feel like the excision surgery was worth that recovery time?
1,000,000%. Yeah. I still live with chronic pain daily, but I was not living my life before my surgery. I just felt so lost. I was in so much pain. It felt like everything was increasing and nobody had answers. And everybody that I went to talk to would say that there's no way that endo was affecting me. And I still had OBGYNs telling me that this is clearly a mental thing and you need to stop wasting your time. Like, stop wasting our time. Stop going to pelvic floor PT. Stop coming to me because you need to go to therapy. And I'm like, I'm going to therapy. I go to two therapists now and I'm still in pain. So I don't know what to tell you.
God.
But no, the excision surgery I never thought that I would have good days,
Hmm.
truly. And I'm having a lot of good days. And I think I'm learning to manage things as well. And I'm just in a different space mentally, but
Yeah, it definitely helps. Bring some hope back.
absolutely.
Well, we're getting to the end. What is one piece of advice you would give to somebody who's newly diagnosed with endo?
I always say go find community that feels like a safe space to you. I've learned more from the endo community than I have from my doctors, and I feel like I'm constantly teaching my doctors about things that I've learned from other people. And I've actually gotten adenomyosis and EDS diagnosed because of the community, because I saw other people talking about it and I was like, I have that. Oh my God, I thought that was endo. I thought that that was just normal. Or so I think that finding community is huge. Finding resources like Endo What is huge. Finding spaces that have factual information.
Hmm.
Because when you look up the definition on Google, you get the wrong definition. So, like, yeah, it's really isolating to live with. And then it's really isolating when the misinformation that circulates it, it's really hard to decipher. So, hearing firsthand from people and stories, and also finding a multidisciplinary approach team to work with you. It's not going to be just one doctor. I go to pelvic floor PT, I go to a naturopath, I go to my primary care, I have an endometriosis specialist, I have an EDS specialist. I go to acupuncture, like I go to therapy.
Oh, I was gonna ask you about that. If you've tried dry needling or acupuncture.
I would love to give acupuncture more of a try. I honestly haven't gone in a while, but I'm in a very different spot now. When I was going, my organs were entangled with things. So I think that it made sense that it wasn't really making the effect that I was going there for, but also like breath work and finding ways to calm your nervous system when you're in a lot of pain, and just finding those different modalities, different products, things that help you. And when you feel comfortable to talk about it, talk about it. And you will be met with people that maybe won't understand, but the right people will understand. And you're giving them an opportunity to truly be in the know of what you're going through. When you're gaslit your entire life and you're told that you're crazy and you're just dramatic and you're complaining when you talk about things, and it can be easy to kind of shove that down and then get resentful at people for not understanding, but people can't understand unless
You talk about it. I feel like community is just so important. Initially, the satisfaction of knowing that something actually is wrong with you, it helps, but then soon after you will,
oh,
yeah, come to terms with that. Now I will have this forever. I guess my last question for you is if you could tell someone who has never heard of endo one thing, what would it be?
one thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question.
It's one of the top 20 most painful conditions in the world. And it affects, well, can I say and? If I say it all in one sentence, does it count?
It counts. It counts.
It's one of the top 20 most painful conditions in the world, and it affects at least 1 in 10 people assigned female at birth. And Australia just came out with a study that it's actually 1 in 7. So
Wow.
it is very prevalent. And you know someone with endo. So it's important for you to go out of your way to learn about that so that you can show up for the people in your life.
Yes, go off. Thank you so much. Where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram and TikTok at endometriosis M.
Perfect. Well, thank you so, so much. You have been amazing. Remember to connect with me on Instagram at Chronic Chronicles Pod and share your thoughts, experiences, suggestions, your favorite coffee order, whatever you want to talk about. Your feedback really does mean the world to me. And before we sign off, I'd also love to extend a heartfelt invitation to review and rate this podcast. Your reviews really do help us reach more listeners and continue to grow this lovely, lovely community. Before we close out today's episode, I do want to leave you with this. Please, please, please remember to be kind to yourself and do not hesitate to reach out for support when you need it. Until next time, take care of yourself and we'll talk soon.